Hey guys, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about all the books I read the first quarter of the year. So from January to March, I read quite a few books and I keep track of them on the story graph. So I will be reading from here on my laptop. It's also an app on your phone if you'd like to check it out. I prefer it to Goodreads. If you're at all curious or have more questions, maybe I'll do a video about it. Let me know. For now, we're going to be going through all of them. I read 16 books so far this year, which is kind of insane. A lot of them, maybe over half of them, have been audiobooks and I listen to them when I work at my desk. So that's how I've been getting through so many. With that, let's get started. I will give you the title, the author, a little synopsis, and what I thought of them so far. And then at the end, I'll tell you my top 3 and my worst 3. So the first one we have is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. And according to the story graph, here's the little blurb. A striking and surprising debut novel from the exhilarating new voice. Such a Fun Age is a page-turning and big-hearted story about race and privilege. Set around a young Black babysitter, her well-intentioned employer, and a surprising connection that threatens to undo them both. I loved this book. I thought it was so fun. I thought it was funny. The character Alex was awful. But Amira, the babysitter, was amazing. I loved her. So funny, so relatable, just wonderful. The next book I read this year was a physical book, and this was Queenie by Candace Carty-Williams. I had heard from a lot of people about this book, so I wanted to pick it up when I saw it in Target. And this is described as the Bridget Jones's Diary meets Americana, even though she's British, in this disarmingly honest, boldly political, and truly inclusive novel that will speak to anyone who has gone looking for love and found something very different in its place. Didn't like this one as much. I gave it 3 stars. The things it talks about are totally worth talking about and reading about, so I wouldn't say don't pick it up. I would say just be aware. I didn't like the main character, but that doesn't mean I don't empathize and sympathize with all the struggles that she goes through in the book. But overall wasn't the best. The third book I read was actually an audiobook again, and this is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I already mentioned that I don't necessarily love this book, but I'll go over the synopsis for you. Under the streets of London, there's a place most people could never ever dream of. A city of monsters and saints, murderers and angels, knights in armor, and pale girls in black velvet. This is the city of people who have fallen between the cracks. I just didn't like the main character, yet again. I found Richard Mayhew to be a pick-me guy. He was like, kind of bland, didn't really have a lot of opinions until things didn't go his way, and then he had an opinion, which is fine. I don't know, I just didn't care. I found his companion Door in this book to be much more interesting, and I kind of wish it was more about her. She's in a lot of it, but she's like the plot vehicle. She pushes everything along, and Richard was just kind of there, in my opinion, kind of fumbling through it, and ended up being the hero, but I just was kind of like about him. I was like, I don't know if you deserve that, but that's just my opinion. This book came highly recommended to me by a coworker, so to each their own. Next is The Hazelwood, another audiobook. I adored this one. So this is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, and this one says, 17-year-old Alice and her mother have spent most of Alice's life on the road, always a step ahead of the uncanny bad luck biting at their heels. But when Alice's grandmother, the reclusive author of a cult classic book, Pitch Dark Fairy Tales, dies, alone in her estate, the Hazelwood, Alice learns how bad her luck can really get. Her mother is stolen away by a figure who claims to come from the hinterland, the cruel supernatural world where her grandmother's stories are set. Alice's only lead is the message her mother left behind: stay away from the Hazelwood. I love dark fairy tales. They're my favorite. I will always read dark Eurocentric fairy tales, any kind of fantasy like that. So this was super fun to read. It was really interesting. I kind of like that it's a story within a story. It's about a book and it takes place within a book. It's very meta. I'm very into this. There's a couple other ones that are like, they tell the stories that are in like the Hazelwood, or I'm sorry, the Hinterland novels. So cool. Loved it. Next we have Mexican Gothic, another audiobook by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This one was also not my favorite. The first 2/3 of the novel were incredible. Didn't like the ending, so let me give you the synopsis. From the author of Gods of Jade and Shadow comes a reimagining of the classic Gothic suspense novel, a story about an isolated mansion in 1950s Mexico and the brave socialite drawn to its treacherous secrets. I really liked Noemi. She was a great character. Like I said, the first 2/3 of the story were incredible. So the ending involves a twist that there were seeds of it, but the author didn't set up a world that involved magic, and so to have that ending include magic seemed a little weird, but throughout the first 2/3, I thought it was very, what is the name of that movie? Crimson Peak, starring Tom Hiddleston and directed by Guillermo del Toro. It was very Crimson Peak. It was a very haunted mansion, so I really appreciated it. But fair warning about the ending, little disappointing, but I would definitely recommend it. It got 4 stars for me. Then I read a classic, which is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I mean, I'm a sucker for these Barnes & Noble covers, so I read this. It took me about a month to get through just because it's so hard. She took me to school, basically. I had to look up some vocabulary words, which I appreciated. But this to me it's always billed as like a great romance. Not romantic to me, like at all. It's a much more interesting study of 1800s culture, and I mean, the back says enough. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. So to me, it's much more interesting to like examine the gender roles of both men and women in the 1800s. This is like post-Revolutionary War. There's talk of redcoats. It's just interesting. It wasn't my favorite. I don't think it's necessarily worth the hype as a romance novel, but definitely worth the hype as a, hey, there's a bunch of assholes in this book. Let's examine why they're assholes and why their world and their, not culture, but I guess their society is so choking is the word I want to say, but like straight-laced like a corset. So interesting. Didn't love it. Got a 3.25 for me. The next book is another audiobook, but the next one is A Study in Scarlet, which is the first Sherlock Holmes novel. I have this thing where I want to read the classics because I'm curious about them. I'm not necessarily like a massive classics fan, but I was definitely interested in reading it. I don't think I really need to explain the plot. It's a murder mystery. Watson and Sherlock have to solve it. It is an interesting story, especially when they do the background of what actually caused the person to commit that murder. Sherlock Holmes is a hysterical character, and I would definitely pick up another one, maybe just not right away. This one got 4 stars for me. The next one is another one I listened to on audiobook. I did a full review for this one, so if you want to see my full thoughts, click the I up there, but it is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I adored this book. I give it 5 stars. Let me just read you the little blurb. What happens when America's first son falls in love with the Prince of Wales? There you go. That's all you need to know. It's a gay romance, and I adored it. I thought it was so cute. There's a full review. I gotta stop talking, so you go watch that video. Next, we have 5 books. They're all in a series. I read this in 2.5 weeks, so needless to say, almost every single one is 5 stars, but I'm gonna go into further detail about them. First, we have A Quarter Thorns and Roses. Like I said, Beauty and the Beast retelling. Click the eye up here to see me react to it. I loved this book. I loved it, and it's so interesting to compare A Quarter Thorns and Roses to, oh, this is a big book, A Court of Mist and Fury. It does a complete 180 from the first one. People regard this as the best one, but is this synopsis gonna be spoiler free? That is a spoiler. Actually, never mind. There's spoilers in it. Basically, she defeats the bad. She goes back to the Spring Court, but she learns something about relationships that cannot last after you've gone through something hard, and she learns about found family, and she deals with PTSD, and oh, I just loved it. And it was a lot like Hades and Persephone, but not dumb. And it's not exactly like the retelling, it's merely hinted at. It's very much so its own story and a continuation. And this is like, you have so many change of hearts in this book, and I just loved it. Then there's the 3rd book in the series, A Court of Wings and Ruin. This is the war book, hence why it's W-A-R at the end. I loved this one. This one was, I can't decide if this one's my favorite or a different one is my favorite, but this book really became its own story at this point. Like, it was no longer really like these retellings of these classic stories, and the characters were really fleshed out. And there was just a lot more world building, and you saw all of the different courts, which are based on the seasons and times of day. So you have spring, summer, fall, winter, dawn. Is it dusk? No, it's dawn, night, and day. So I'm so into that. If you know, I love Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is kind of combining all the elements of that along with this fae world, and I loved it. I loved it. Then there's this one, which is A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is the non-denominational winter holiday solstice celebration book. It's really like a 200-page epilogue for A Court of Wings and Ruin, which I would highly recommend you have both in your possession when you read it, because to take time, I think, between reading the two would lose some of the emotion behind this one, and it would just seem silly. But I thought this was really fun. I probably will reread this around Christmas time. I read it in a day. It's like 200 something pages, really quick, fun read. And just the way that you get to see the characters just be during a peaceful time is so nice. I loved it, 5 stars. But it also is the perfect setup for the last book that has been released in the series so far, which is, actually I do think this is my favorite because I cried 3 times reading this book, which is A Court of Silver Flames. This is a switch point of view. You get it's more of the point of view of 2 characters, Cassian and Nesta being Feyre's sister, and it deals with a lot of, like, again, PTSD, self-loathing, learning to love yourself, like finding friendship and how important and supportive those can be. I just loved it. This one got 5 stars as well, and I can't say enough good things about this book. So I'm sorry if you're tired of hearing about it, but I am, in fact, obsessed, and I will continue to shove it down everyone's throat until they decide to read it as well. Just maybe like a 17, 18 and up warning on these, because on top of there being a lot of violence in them, there's a lot of sex. It's just a complex book, which is why I say be a little older to read it. Like, this is definitely new adult fiction. Next, I actually read a nonfiction book, and this is called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. So let me say that this is interesting. It got a 2.75 from me, and here's why. So the first half is all about, it mentions a lot of historical figures and how they were going against the grain of society and kind of doing their own thing while still balancing being a part of society, and I was super into this. Like I said, this is kind of about social media and how you can, like, take part in society but still maintain your individuality, which is all good, and like how to balance your life on social media and not be like a look at me, and how to like be able to turn off the screen but without overdoing it and being like, well, I don't have social media, and like being on your high horse. Super into the first half. Second half turned into a, oh, well, I went to this gallery and I saw this movie and I know all of this and it made me think about this, and I'm such a good advocate for all of these things. And I was like, you're doing the exact thing that you set out not to do. You're just not doing it on social media. So you're no better than any of us who choose to balance our lives on social media. You're just bragging in a book. Meanwhile, I might brag on Instagram. There is no difference. It really made me angry because at first it was like, yes, you're making all these great points about like this 1960s and hippies and how dropping out never really worked for them, and then it led to a lot of cults and the problems that there could be. She had a really good level head about all that stuff. And then it came to the present day and she turned into a shithead. So 2.75. Recommend the first half, not the second half. Then I read another nonfiction book right after that, which is Hood Feminism. I have had this book sitting on my shelf for about a year. I never got around to it. I did not give this book a rating, not because it wasn't good, but because it just felt wrong, because it felt very, not that it felt, it was very honest. It put me in my place, as it should. So I highly recommend this to everyone who considers themselves an ally and has thrust that label upon themselves. Maybe rethink where your, not interests lie, but maybe rethink what you fight for and about, and where your focus is versus where it should be. I loved it. I will give this to everyone. So it's a great book because it's not like you're a horrible person, you put your focus on the wrong spot. It's like, hey, you should be like, so there was a couple of chapters. There was homelessness, hunger. I gotta look back. I should have marked this one. There were a lot of ones that just broke my heart. Oh, the basic, you know, in the hierarchy of needs, housing, hunger, and gun violence, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart in the best way because I'm much more educated on things now. So I'm still not very eloquent when I talk about things, and I'm getting better at it, but the information is in my head, and I'll probably reread this at a later date. And then to end on a high note, the last book I read this quarter was an audiobook. It is called Girl, Serpent, Thorn by Melissa Bashardoust. I'm sorry if I butchered that. It's really good. It's a nice fun story. It's young adult, so it's an easy reading level. It's very plot driven. I'm usually a character driven reader when it comes to fiction, but this is plot and I really appreciated that. And the reason I did appreciate that is because it's LGBTQ representation, but it was merely like not in a tokenistic, is that a word? Tokenistic way. It was like really just part of the story. It was women loving women and it was just so good. I loved it. And in terms of the plot, sorry, my mom is asking me about dinner. Where I lost my train of thought. Oh, the plot. So yes, it was plot driven, but the plot itself was essentially Rapunzel meets a Persian folklore, I think it is, fairy tale kind of thing. There's a whole chapter at the back of the book that I listened to where it tells you the background and why certain things are named what they are and where they come from. I thought it was so good. I also am working on finding books to recommend based on your favorite Disney princess. And so when I say Rapunzel, this will most likely be it. I'm still doing research. I have one for Mulan. I'm trying to not recommend ACOTAR for Belle, even though that's my favorite princess and that's my favorite one that I've read so far. But yeah, that's a lot of talking for me, but I'll give you my worst three without saying too much. I'm gonna say the worst three were Neverwhere, Queenie, and How to Do Nothing Resisting the Attention Economy. The top three, I'm gonna count ACOTAR as one. So the whole A Court of Thorns and Roses series is one, 2 is Hood Feminism, and 3 is Red, White, and Royal Blue. Those were the top 3 and the worst 3 that I read so far. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you would like more, please click that subscribe button. It does so much for me. If you give that video a thumbs up, it does a lot for me. And leave a comment down below telling me your favorite book you've read so far this year. If you haven't read any, do you want to pick up any of the ones that I talked about? And yeah, let me know what your reading goal is as well. I don't know, that's a lot of questions for you guys to answer, but I hope you are having a wonderful day, week, what have you. And yeah, follow me on Instagram if you would like to. Links are in the description as well as along the bottom right here. So have a nice day, guys. Bye.